I don't know if nobody talks about this writing advice. I mean, I'm talking about it and I'm somebody, unless I'm still a nobody. Today, we're going to talk about some things that can improve your writing, things that aren't really talked about all that much. This is writing advice that might be a little bit out there, a little weird, far from the mainstream, maybe a little bit kinky. Wait, what were we talking about? All right, first, less oftenly talked about piece of writing advice is theme at the scene or chapter level. Theme and its hangers on, like motif and tone, are almost always talked about at a whole story level. We talk about the theme of a novel or the theme of a whole short story. But there is a lot that can be gained from thinking about themes and the elements that go into theme on a shorter time scale within a larger work. Having a chapter follow a specific theme or having an overarching message is a really interesting concept, at least to me. I'm always thinking about ways to make chapters more distinct, to make every chapter feel like its own sort of entity within the story. And I think having some thematic elements specific to that chapter is a really good way to do that. You still have your main overarching theme for the entire story, obviously, and maybe the chapter level themes play into that in some kind of interesting way. This works especially well when you have multiple scenes in one chapter from different viewpoints, but those scenes all sort of tie together in some way thematically. In my current work in progress, I have a chapter that moves between different characters who are all traveling in this like desert caravan sort of thing. And the sort of theme of this chapter is that they are coming towards this walled city, which is their ultimate destination. And every viewpoint character has a different set of feelings about this and different reactions to it. But from a sort of thematic level, that entire chapter is tied together this way. So stop thinking about theme as just something at the whole story level. A single scene or a chapter can also have a theme, and it's worth thinking about. Next, not often talked about piece of writing advice is character versus narrator voice balance. Everything you write is affected by voice, or at least it should be. Broadly speaking, you have the character voice, you have the authorial voice, which is your voice, and you also have the narrator's voice. Character voice and author voice are talked about a lot. Narrator voice isn't talked about as often, and it has some interesting relationships with the character voice. In first-person perspective, the character and narrator voice tend to blend together because the character is the narrator. So a lot of times it's just one voice. There isn't a separation between the two. However, in third limited or third omniscient, you can have a separate narrator's voice, which is coloring the writing. And this is something that not a lot of people take advantage of. A strongly voiced third-person narrator is not something I've encountered a lot, and I think there are a lot of opportunities here. What happens is you have the character voice coming through, but you also have the narrator whose opinions might be different from the character and colors the prose in some very subtle ways. For instance, say you have an overconfident character, someone who is swollen with hubris. They may assess a situation but miss some point of information that the narrator notices but the character doesn't. Like they might be flirting with someone and the character notices the other person laughing at their jokes and they think things are going really well, but the narrator notices the other person rolling their eyes and glancing towards the exit. I think this is something that's more common in third omniscient stories because when you have an omniscient narrator, they tend to have a bit more personality, they tend to have a bit more voice. Their opinions are sort of injected into the work. In third limited, most of the time you have either a very neutral narrator or a narrator that is very much in line with the character themselves. So it's almost at that point becomes like a first person perspective story where the narrator voice and the character's voice are one and the same. Anyway, I think there's some interesting opportunities here. The most extreme example of this would be having a third-person narrator who is actually like a fully developed character who's telling the story. That's kind of an extreme case of this. I think there's lots of room to play with this and do something less extreme, perhaps. Next up is specificity, which is Really hard to say. This has to do with how you practice and improve as a writer. Specificity specifically refers to the specificness of the practice that you do. It is based around this idea that if you want to improve at something, you need to spend as much time as possible doing that thing in as specific a way as you can. If you want to get better at romance, you need to spend more time writing romance. If your goal is to get good at writing novels, then you need to spend time writing novels. More time spent practicing exactly the thing that you're trying to get better at will generally make you better at that thing overall. Learning the ins and outs of a genre or a medium takes a lot of time and it takes practice. And the real quality, the people who are really able to write something that fits well within a genre or a specific medium are usually the people who understand the nuances really well. Now, there are some caveats to this and why I think the advice around specificity is not absolute. There is some value in variety and stepping outside of your comfort zone. Writing is somewhat unique in the fact that good writing often means pulling together disparate ideas in new ways. And one of the ways to find and develop those ideas is to experiment. In fact, arguably one of the biggest literary trends right now, romantasy, is based on this idea of taking two disparate genres and combining them together and creating something new that is based on that combination. That's not something you can do if you're always just locked into one specific area. You have to move outside of that area. Breaking the rules of a genre in new and exciting ways requires understanding the existing rules of that genre or of that medium. And the only way to do that is through practice and understanding and having a very thorough knowledge of whatever it is you're trying to circumvent, which means that specificity is an important thing to consider. Specificity. It's really hard to say. And the last piece of advice that we'll talk about that a lot of people don't talk about is enjoyment. Specifically, the idea that you should enjoy the writing process on some level. Writing is often talked about as this sort of misery-filled process, mainly because a lot of the times it is. Writing is really fun until you start to take it seriously. If you want to get better, it means enduring critiques and fixing flaws and working on your weak areas, all with very little positive feedback and very little encouragement. Motivation for a project will usually fade before that project is brought to fruition. Your own self-doubts and criticism will slowly erode any positive feelings you have about your writing, and you'll constantly be assailed by comparisons with other people who are better and more successful at you while simultaneously not appearing to be afflicted with the same gut-wrenching feelings of inadequacy that you are every single waking moment of your life. If writing was easy, a lot more people would do a lot more of it more consistently. While there's certainly a love for the craft and a sense of satisfaction that comes from the act of writing, serious writing is work. It is not something that is purely enjoyable all of the time. There is some drudgery, there is some difficulty, there is some pain in the process. Now, this painting of the writing process as a purely miserable affair can be dangerous, because ultimately the purpose of the act of writing is to produce something that is enjoyable on some level. At least if we're talking about fiction, which we are in this case, because fiction is meant to be enjoyable. You should expect the writing process to be difficult. It's not going to be fun the whole time. But on the same note, if your story doesn't bring you any joy, if you don't enjoy anything about the process, if you don't like what you're writing, then something might not be right. Writing is like climbing a mountain to take in a really incredible view. Yeah, the climbing is hard and demanding, but there's a reward at the end, and you can see yourself getting higher and higher. If you find yourself climbing forever but never seeing a nice view, then that's a sign that you're climbing the wrong mountain. Or if we disassemble that metaphor, that you're working on the wrong writing project. The thing that will pull you through the work of something like a novel is the enjoyment of the story. You should be invested in bringing the story to life because it engages you on some level. Something in what you're writing should move you. There should be some kind of purpose behind it. Maybe it's a happy story, maybe it's a sad story, but you should feel something coming out of the process. If you don't, then that's a sign that things aren't right. Enjoyment matters when it comes to writing. Writing is an incredibly difficult task at times, but there should still be some enjoyment out of it. The whole purpose of writing fiction is to create something that's enjoyable, something that's meaningful, something that impacts you and other people in some way. So if you don't feel that kernel of enjoyment with what you're doing, it's a sign that something isn't right. Speaking of enjoyment, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope the fact that it's over doesn't bring you joy, because you should enjoy watching it so much that you never want it to end. I don't know if that really makes any sense. Anyway, so there you have it. If you have any pieces of not often talked about writing advice, please share them in the comments down below. If you want to see more stuff like this, please check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel for more content. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.